And my first guest is Katie Thompson. Katie has been in her job exactly 1 month, but she is no stranger to marine conservation. Welcome to Talk of the Bay.
Thank you. Thank you, Rachel, for having me here today.
Thanks for coming by. You have been involved with saving the oceans for a long time. Tell me a little bit about your background and what brought you to Santa Cruz Save Our Shores, a venerable conservation organization for the oceans.
Thank you. Yes, it's true. I'm no stranger to marine conservation. I've been working internationally in marine conservation for over a decade. I've always been interested in the intersection of nature and people, working closely with communities who depend on the health of the ocean and their resilient coastlines. So after working internationally, primarily in Latin America and the Caribbean on coastal habitat restoration projects and transboundary marine conservation, I wanted to take that interest and that expertise here locally to Monterey Bay, where I've lived for 6 years. And so that's what inspired me to take the reins at Save Our Shores. And I've been inspired since day one. It's only been 30 days so far, but I've been inspired since day one from the program staff and the amazing work that we do at Save Our Shores, and we have for over 40 years.
You had a word there I did not recognize, transboundary conservation. What does that mean?
So transboundary conservation is first acknowledging that the ocean is one ocean around our world, and countries have to work together, jurisdictions have to work together in order to protect and to save it. And so it's really using the ocean as a platform to bring these different stakeholder group together to protect and study and save the ocean.
Which is similar to the mission of Save Our Shores. It really has a jurisdiction of the whole Monterey Bay, which K-Squid is closely aligned with in that we broadcast all over the Monterey Bay. And our mascot is a squid. We chose that intentionally, and we chose the call letters KSQD on purpose as a nod to the long squid fishery and also just the natural world where we all share this boundary between the ocean and the land. 2 photos really stood out to me this week. One, all the people beach going on Labor Day weekend, just packing the beaches. And the other, all the sea lions down by Cannery Road, just packing the beach. There must have been 150,000 sea lions. I don't know how many, but lots. So that really is the bottom line, isn't it? How can we live together with all these creatures without impacting them?
Exactly. How can we live with the creatures? How can we protect our coastlines for also our own houses that are based on the coastline and facing the impacts of sea level rise every day? And so how can we, through our own individual actions, protect the coastline, but also and the watersheds that depend on the health of the bay, but also how can we work with our local government representatives to implement policies that will do the same?
And as you said, there is no real boundary. Like there's no line around the Monterey Bay outside of which everything's unprotected and inside of which there are certain laws that are part of a marine sanctuary, which I want to get to. But when it comes to ocean warming, for example, or sea level rise, there's not a barrier between the big open ocean and our bay. And so anything that happens in the big world affects us. And I bet, how long has Save Our Shores been around?
So we were first started as a grassroots movement in 1978 to combat oil drilling, and then incorporated officially in 1980 as a 501c3 nonprofit.
So in those, 44 some odd years, so much has changed in terms of the impacts that you may or may not have any control. Like we can pick up litter, we can educate the people who live here, but some of these things are so big, they're going to come at us regardless almost of what we do.
Exactly. It's particularly, for example, climate change. So migration patterns of fish, of whales, marine mammals in general are changing because of climate change. And so acknowledging that and supporting the science that happens here in the bay will lead to their continued protection, but also points to my earlier point about the need for transboundary collaboration. So, for example, the fish that used to reside here in Monterey Bay may travel further down to Mexico or further up north to Canada. So realizing that it's really a transboundary collaboration needs to happen.
So right now there's, I think it's a giant anchovy run happening in the bay, and all the creatures are going nuts, having feeding frenzies. Only like 6 months ago, I was interviewing a scientist it was someone at native animal rescue who didn't know why the pelicans were starving to death. Not enough food. Is that kind of what we're seeing, is these extremes that we didn't used to see?
Exactly. The extremes in the food for the animals that eat it, extremes in the weather patterns, so great fluctuations in the temperature, perhaps great fluctuations in the storm surge, the tides, everything. All these taking individually look small, but together can have quite an impact.
I recently watched a TED Talk from a Native American woman who said, we often think of humans as the problem, but we can also be something positive. We can actually ameliorate some of these impacts we're having and even make beneficial change that could go even beyond the status quo, health of the ecosystem. What are some things in the sanctuary and that Save Our Shores is doing that you could count on that side of the ledger of humans doing good things?
Yeah, so there's a lot to be happy about in terms of solutions and saving Monterey Bay. That's what Save Our Shores focuses on and has always focused on, is very solution oriented. So for example, our beach cleanups serve primarily two purposes. One, to get the trash literally off the beaches and out of the ecosystem. And two, to create stewardship among local residents, so people who live near the beach, but also visitors who frequently visit our beaches. So creating that sense of, I want to protect this environment, it's important to me, and that then will bleed into other parts of their lives where they can continue to be an ocean steward and a coastal steward. A lot of our education programs also focus on that exact fact. So we are going into places, working with communities who typically aren't able, due to various number of reasons, perhaps transportation, money, get to their coasts, get to their state parks, and have that experience of being on the water and the coast. And so breaking down those barriers, providing those experiential learning opportunities, and creating stewards so that they can grow up and perhaps be a marine biologist or a marine conservationist, protecting the coast and the ocean that they love so much.
They always say you got to know it to love it. And I think that's true about the ocean, even if you've never been to it. Coming to an aquarium or looking at pictures of creatures is always fascinating to children. I think they intuitively know that they're part of this world, the natural world, and the ocean is part of that world as well. In fact, a big part. So let's focus for a moment on the big coastal cleanup that's coming up in September. And if you just joined me here on Talk of the Bay, I'm Rachel Ann Goodman here on K-Squid on Talk of the Bay, and I'm here with Katie Thompson, the new executive director of Save Our Shores. Coastal cleanup has been going on a long time, hasn't it?
Yes, it has. This year we're celebrating our 40th year of Save Our Shores being the organizer of this regional effort.
Awesome. That I bet if you counted all the tons of trash you've collected, it would be a monumental pile.
Hundreds, tons of trash. It's pretty incredible. Ideally, we won't collect any trash, right? Or that number goes down. But the reality is the more volunteers, and we're getting more and more volunteers every year, targeting beaches, more and more beaches every year. This year we're over 60 different beach sites across Monterey and Santa Cruz County, as well as in riverbeds, so looking at the watersheds. And the more volunteers we get, the more trash we pick up.
Have you had a numbers genius ever try to account for the change and figure out if, in general, people are littering less? Is there a way to know that?
The short answer is it depends. So depending on the time of year, we're finding litter that's clearly from, food takeout. Cigarette butts is actually the number one piece of trash we find on beaches. And I can talk to you about an advocacy effort we're doing surrounding cigarette butts. But then also there's a lot of debris that washes up from the ocean. So not necessarily at fault of the people that are on the beach, but it's coming from somewhere else.
Is it coming from cruise ships, do you think? And
it
things
could
like
be coming
that?
from cruise ships. It could be coming from, other places along the coast, across the ocean. It just depends. And that's part of another reason why our beach cleanups are useful is because we're documenting every single piece of trash we're getting. We're weighing all the trash we're picking up so that that information can go to an international coastal cleanup database and inform policies and advocacy. So the fact that we found from 2013 to 2023, we picked up nearly 440,000 cigarette butts on our beaches. And because of that, we are really advocating for the ban of filtered cigarette products in Santa Cruz County, which will go up for a vote by the Board of Supervisors soon. So we really think that policy could help decrease that number one source of marine litter, at least here in Santa Cruz.
And you could say people here know how to roll their own. So
exactly.
They have that skill down already. Just switch materials. Not that we're advocating taking up tobacco in any way. But I did want to get the details. So if someone wanted to participate, which I hope our listeners are that kind of listener who wants to pitch in and pick up litter on the beaches or rivers, what would they do to sign up? Can they show up or do they need to register?
Yeah, that's a great question. We would love it if people could register. Go to saveourshores.org, and there's a page for annual coastal cleanup, and they can register there. Again, we have sites across Monterey and Santa Cruz County. It's September 21st, Saturday, from 9 a.m. to noon, and we're asking people to get there about 15 minutes ahead of time to pick up and set up. We will supply the supplies for the volunteers, but if you have your favorite gloves or your favorite trash grabber or bucket, please bring it. We also welcome people bringing their own supplies.
Do you give out those little grabber thingies?
Yes, we have some of those. We don't have some for everybody, so we recommend people bring their own. We have gloves and bags that people will be putting the trash in, and also scales to weigh the trash at the end. And then at the end of the day, we, as people bring back their supplies at our office by the harbor in Santa Cruz, we're holding a supply return party to celebrate the good efforts of the volunteers who give their time tirelessly year in and year out.
That sounds like a lot of fun. I had a great time. I went up to Bonnie Doon Beach and Davenport Landing, which I think just gets a lot of glass for some odd reason. I think because it's sort of not a state park. It's not anybody's beach, so people have to go clean it up extra. But it was fun because I saw my neighbors and we had a fun time. And I met some new people. So if you're looking to get out in the fresh air and go to a safe activity where you can make something happen, it really does look good at the end after everybody's combed through all the garbage and got it out of there. That is an awesome thing. And I think you mentioned briefly that it also happens on rivers and roads. Tell me more about that.
Yes. So the idea being that all rivers, all streams lead to the ocean. And so by cleaning up these watersheds, these rivers and the streams, we are preventing it from getting to the ocean. It's all connected. And additionally, the healthy rivers mean a healthy ocean and vice versa. So it's really important that we're also cleaning up those inland waterways and engaging those communities that depend on those watershed for their resilience.
And when it rains a lot, you can just see it all heading for the ocean and you want to stop it. Tell us a little bit about the health impacts to ocean creatures of plastics in particular. What happens when they eat them? They often look like jellyfish to some creatures, I understand.
Yes, that's probably the most emblematic photo of a creature, marine creature in plastic is a plastic bag that looks like a jellyfish, for example, to a sea turtle, or a plastic straw through the nose of a sea turtle. All very horrible things, but it's not only the big plastics that you and I can see, but it's the microplastics that endure for years and years beyond our lifetimes. And all plastics, when they break down, they're breaking down just into more plastics that we can't see with our eye. And so with the cleanups, we're removing those plastics from the environment so that they don't continue to break down into microplastics. They don't continue to leach toxic chemicals into the marine environment. And the effects of microplastics, we're only beginning to understand the impacts of health to marine creatures, but also to us as humans in our waterways.
I read somewhere that they found it in breast milk, they found it in all human tissues. Is that what you've read as well?
Yes. They're finding it in areas we wouldn't even expect, in seafood, for example. And so just acknowledging that it's a very persistent toxic in our environment, and we need to remove it. So that's why we have these cleanups to remove those toxic chemicals.
It's interesting because, you live in a coastal community. In Ireland, there was one community that wasn't even by the ocean. They had a lake. They banned all to-go cups. They completely had no to-go cups there. But in another community just down the way on the ocean, everybody was toting these bright yellow cups. And I think it needs to be a nationwide or a worldwide ban. And the plastic industry, just like a lot of big corporate lobbyists, has a really big lobby, and it's the same lobby as the fossil fuel companies. Pretty much they share PR firms that do the lobbying. And I remember, California's tried a couple statewide plastic bans, and they've been fought pretty heavily by these lobbyists, and they take them back off the table. The politicians are afraid of these lobbyists or get money from them, one or both.
Yeah.
And so the grassroots organizations like yours, Save Our Shores, I know you can't do open advocacy for bills, but you can certainly advise, right? And do a lot of other things that would be helpful.
Right, yeah, and exactly, and provide perhaps the science or their arguments behind why these types of regulations are good. And like you said, it's all connected. Plastics are made from fossil fuels, and so of course they'll have similar lobbyists, and really working with those plastic producers and those companies at the higher end of the supply chain, and holding them responsible because they have the resources and the power to determine how those plastics are made. For example, reducing use of virgin plastics in their products, or trying to switch to reusable material, for example. And so there are tools at hand, but I agree there needs to be some encouragement from regulation where possible to decrease plastic usage.
Well, my daughter was in Japan for a year, and she said they don't give out to go anything. You have to bring your own. And they're just trained to bring their own cups and containers. So, and people generally don't expect to be able to take their meals away from the venue. This is a fairly recent development. So anything we think is normal is just an invention of humans, and we could invent it just as easily and retrain ourselves for the good of our own health, if not the good of sea creatures as well. But we are all bound up in the food chain together. Talk about some of the things we eat from the ocean that we'll want to keep eating if the ocean is healthy.
So choosing your seafood selection wisely, I think, is a very important act that each of us individually can do. And so usually what I tell people is to eat locally as much as you can. And fortunately, we are grateful to live in Monterey Bay, live near the ocean, have that option. But asking where the seafood comes from, and if it's harvested legally, trying to identify a local fisher person to buy the fish from. There's different startups up there in terms of aquaculture. So it's a really exciting time for Monterey Bay and these different options. But yes, it's up to each one of us to be responsible consumers of seafood, because overfishing is one of the major threats to the ocean, and so we can each play a part in reducing that.
I watched a documentary, I think it was called Above the Line or At the End of the Line. I forget the title, but it really showed overfishing as a huge problem. And one guy said, what are we going to say to our kids? What happened to all the fish? And he said, we're going to say we ate them all. The ocean can't really feed our full-time appetites for wild fish anymore, given the increasing popularity of it as a food. I remember when it was the cheap food, right? I've lived long enough, I'm a dinosaur, to remember, $2 a pound fish.
Yeah.
Not anymore.
Yeah.
But it doesn't stop people from wanting it.
Yeah.
Even in its $12, $15, $22 a pound at the New Leaf Market for salmon.
Yeah, exactly. And that's maybe the more accurately priced fish. I mean, there is still some cheap seafood that shouldn't be that cheap, but they are because of many issues, but global subsidies of fishing vessels so that it continues to be profitable for the fishing company. But the truth of the matter is that the ocean's a big place. Fishing vessels are going farther and longer to try and find the fish to feed the people. And because they're going farther from the coast, their activities are more easily hidden than they were otherwise. And so there's a host of issues in that, but it just comes back to when you can, if you want to eat seafood, then try to find a local source and try to support that fisher person's economy and buy directly from them where possible.
I hear you can go down to the yacht harbor sometime and just buy it right off the boat, which is kind of a cool thing that a lot of places don't offer. So that's exciting. We have just about 7 minutes left. Let's talk about the Monterey Bay Marine Sanctuary a little bit. Save Our Shores, of which you are now the executive director, Katie Thompson, has a long history of advocating and being part of creating the Monterey Bay National Marine Sanctuary. What's new about the Marine Sanctuary? It's been around for a while. I think they're trying to add another one. Tell us about kind of the role that Save Our Shores plays in relationship to this beautiful protected area that we live next to.
Yeah, so we collaborate with organizations across the Bay, so both in Santa Cruz and Monterey County, to advocate for the protection of Monterey Bay and continued implementation of the Monterey Bay National Marine Sanctuary through efforts in California and nationally. There's always efforts to improve and expand the protected area along the coast. And so we're always working with organizations to make sure those protected areas are informed by science, informed by what's actually happening out there, what needs protected, and make sure those protected areas are integrated together to protect species as a whole.
A lot of people think that, everything's off limits in a sanctuary because of the name sanctuary, but that's not really true. You can't drill there, but you can fish there, right?
Yes, it totally depends on the jurisdiction. And so I would encourage those who are really concerned about the type of activities they can do in a certain area along the coast to look at those regulations and see what is actually limited. Because the goal of having the sanctuary, right, is for a resilient bay for all. And so that doesn't mean that we can't touch it, but it's really mean we're supposed to interact with it in a sustainable way. And so those regulations are put in place with that in mind to keep it around and healthy for generations to come. And so abiding by those regulations are important for everybody to do, but understanding what they actually are could depend on from one side of the bay to the other. So I would encourage people to look into that if you're interested.
What's an example of something that would be different in Monterey than Santa Cruz? Do you know?
Well, it depends, where you are on the coast, but perhaps, there's recreational fishing allowed in one place of the bay, but not the other. Or diving, for example, or different recreational activities that depends on where you are. Also, seasonality. So, for example, sometimes in the southern part of the bay, there's nesting seabirds, and so we're not allowed to do activities during certain times of the year. And so there are many layers of those regulations, but realizing that it's a very dynamic place, and the sanctuary is set up to protect this dynamic place. And so realizing those different regulations and components is complicated but important.
And is that part of Save Our Shores, is to educate people about what those regulations are?
Yeah, we do some of that, but most of what we're doing is really getting people out to experience the sanctuary and connect with it and grow up with it and develop the love for it and to protect it for generations to come.
It's true that, people could come to Santa Cruz or Monterey for the day and go surfing or swimming and never really know, that there's this whole structure around the bay that's keeping it nice.
Right, right. And it's really globally, it's recognized as a beautiful place, and that reputation is incredible. I've worked internationally, always lived near the bay, but it's such an honor now to work to protect it.
It's made it into some major documentaries. I know that some beautiful undersea photography has been filmed here.
Mm-hmm.
We have some creatures that are found nowhere else.
Right.
And we have the Marine Canyon, which is an unusual place as well. So.
Yeah. And that's a lot of thanks to all the great organizations and research institutions that we are fortunate to have here in the Bay.
Like Mbari.
Yes.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And we have the Scripps, and what else do we have? We have
Stanford,
the Moss Landing Marine
Hopkins.
Lab.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
And there's a huge history, too, of studying the Bay, which goes back to Doc Ricketts and his work as the laboratory down there at Cannery Row. It was written about, in Cannery Row, among many books. So, yeah, it's a very storied place. I think I heard that there's efforts to expand or get a new sanctuary south of here. Are you aware of that?
Yeah, so there's proposals out there off of Natural Bridges and Pleasure Point, expanding protections there. And those are designed to protect the kelp beds. And that is still very much a work in progress, and people are commenting on it. And so I would encourage people, if they're interested in learning more, kind of read up on what those regulations would be. But again, the design is to protect those important kelp habitats that are there.
So the 21st is the beach cleanup or river and road cleanup. And people can register online at saveourshores.org.
Yes.
Or they could just show up, right? Like, that's possible.
It's possible. We really encourage people to sign up so we know an accurate count. And so you can choose what beach you want to be at.
So you get a little grabber, too.
Yes.
That's important to your back for old people like me. You need one of those grabbers so you don't have to bend over all day. Well, thank you so much for coming in. I've been talking with Katie Thompson, the new executive director of Save Our Shores, and it was Vicki Nichols I interviewed first, way long time ago, when she was one of the early executive directors of Save Our Shores. So it's been a while. I know Dan Hafley's been deeply involved, and just want to shout out to all the people who have volunteered for year after year to Save Our Shores, and thank you for coming in today and telling us a little bit more about the organization.
Thanks, Rachel, and yes, thanks to the volunteers out there.
Go, Save Our Shores and go K-Squid. All right. This is Talk of the Bay, and today we're talking about the Bay, which is perfect. We're going to be taking a little bit of a different tack in just a moment and talking about the people here. All the different immigrant groups have come in over the years and made this a rich place to live, both culturally, economically, and in so many other ways. We'll be talking with Chris Hasagawa and also Celia Barbarina in just a few minutes. So stay tuned. First, a few announcements.